My parents pushed my brother to end his life, then tried to blame me for it. So I destroyed them and showed everyone the truth. Now, 2 years later, they're asking me to stop, but I just shared even more evidence. I was 17 when I let my little brother get hurt in every way imaginable. Even now, my parents are the most random people I've ever known. If I said a bad word by mistake, they'd barely tell me off and say, "You shouldn't talk like that." But this was only on a good day. On a bad day, like they had a bad day at work, they'd lock me in the basement with no window, food, and just a Dasani water bottle. Or another time in 6th grade when I wanted to improve my GPA, I wrote out every subject and wrote a list of things I can do to improve. I was so proud of it that I made the mistake of showing my mom. "Honey, I'm so proud of you. You are the best son anyone could ask for." But not even a month later, I wasn't understanding a math question she was trying to teach me, and she immediately started screaming, "You are worded, piece of shit. How do you not understand this yet?" Unfortunately, I started crying, and she immediately started tearing my room apart. All the improvements I had written per subject, my Christmas tree, cleared off my entire desk. By the time she was finished, I was so scared that I had managed to be completely silent and stop crying. "You're tidying this all up, you worthless R-word," she said, before slamming the door and walking out. But my breaking point didn't come until I was in the 8th grade and my brother, Eli, was 11, because they started treating him the same way they treated me, if not worse. And it's not like I spoke back to them or anything. But one day I heard him crying because my dad had yelled at him for being an attention seeker when he was sick with a vomiting bug. So I came into his room, pulled him onto my lap, and slowly fed him capfuls of water so he could hydrate without throwing up. But my dad grew suspicious of his sudden silence, and immediately his bedroom door was flung open. I stood up and pretended like I had been hitting Eli for crying, but my dad knew better. He ordered me to get the EF out and locked Eli's door from the outside. And before I could say anything, he grabbed me by the collar, threw me into my room, and I could hear the door lock too. That was the beginning of a life filled with pain. Over the next few weeks, the pants that once fit me could barely stay by themselves. And as for school, our parents had pulled us out and told everyone we were being homeschooled. And of course, no one ever fact-checked them. But the worst pain didn't even come from the constant shouting or the overwhelming hunger. It came when I heard my brother crying alone in his bedroom, when I could hear his pleading for help. It honestly felt like I was in some torture chamber. And whenever they did bring us outside, I was so scared of the world that I never even dared to tell anyone. And through it all, there was just one beacon of hope, and that was RuneScape, a video game. It was the only thing that actually made me happy. By 17, I had gotten so good that I was leading a large clan of 128-year-olds. None of them knew my face, or even my real name. My competence was enough for them to trust me to lead them into battle. My RuneScape family got so big that people were joining and even meeting their true loves. One couple even invited me to their wedding. That's when I met Josh. He was my mentor, so to speak. He was the only one who knew my face and who I was outside of the game. And after 2 months of talking, I finally opened up. I expected him to change the topic or just reply with something about games, but instead, he didn't reply. He called me. I told him everything. The abuse, the neglect, my younger brother. The other end was completely silent until I was done, and he responded with just 7 words. "I think you should stay with me." "Yes," I responded, with no hesitation. I figured that my life was already at an all-time low, so it could only stay low or get better. We planned it out step by step, and the next time my parents let me out for my walk, I hopped on the bus and went to the airport. They didn't even start calling me until the plane was about to take off. Obviously, I just blocked their numbers. When I landed, I spotted Josh with a smudged sign that had my name on it and a huge smile on his face. But through it all, my stomach was churning because I couldn't stop thinking about how I had abandoned Eli, and apparently I had severely underestimated how hard the readjustment period would be. I was sleeping literally all the time because my body didn't have to be in survival mode anymore. So after 3 weeks, when I could finally stay awake all day without a 6-hour nap, I went through all my voicemails, and that's when my heart was ripped out of my chest. When Eli found out I had left, he took his own life. I collapsed to the floor. Josh rushed in, and when I told him what happened, he assured me that my parents wouldn't go unpunished. At the time, I thought he was just comforting me. I didn't understand the weight of his words. I kept replaying our final moments together, Eli's thin face and exhausted eyes haunting me. I should have found a way to take him with me. The night passed in a blur of tears and numbness. Josh helped me to bed, brought water I couldn't drink, while I stared vacantly at the ceiling until morning light filtered through the blinds. The dust particles dancing in the sunbeams seemed obscene in their beauty, the world continuing when Eli no longer existed in it. The guilt devoured me from within, Eli's face appearing every time I closed my eyes. Days melted together as I barely ate or moved. Josh tried his best, bringing food I couldn't stomach, attempting conversations that couldn't reach me. The sandwich would sit untouched until the bread dried out, the apple turning brown beside it. I existed in a fog of grief so thick I could barely see through it. One morning, I found him intensely focused on his laptop, typing furiously. The blue light reflected in his glasses as his fingers moved across the keyboard with unusual urgency. When questioned, he quickly closed it, muttering vaguely about looking into things. The screen snapped shut with a finality that struck me as odd, but grief dulled my curiosity. A week after learning about Eli, I discovered a small, unmarked box on the kitchen table, addressed only with my name. The cardboard was plain brown, sealed sealed with clear packing tape that caught the morning light. Inside lay Eli's favorite pencil, the dinosaur-decorated one he'd chewed down to a stub. My hands trembled as I held this fragment of my brother. The familiar teeth marks on the wood sent a wave of memories crashing over me. Eli concentrating on homework, his small teeth working at the pencil as he thought. When I asked Josh about its delivery, his face drained of color. He suggested throwing it away, but I couldn't bear to part with it. Instead, wrapping it carefully in tissue and placing it in my dresser drawer. The soft sound of the drawer closing felt like sealing away a piece of my heart. 2 days later, another package arrived containing one of Eli's robot-patterned blue socks. The fabric was worn thin at the heel, exactly as I remembered it. Again, no note accompanied this painful reminder. Josh paced the kitchen, his footsteps creating a nervous rhythm on the linoleum as he concluded my parents must be behind these cruel deliveries. His voice rose with concern as he suggested changing addresses, his hands gesturing emphatically. The packages continued arriving every few days, each containing some small piece of Eli. A page from his notebook with his careful handwriting, a button from his jacket, a small plastic dinosaur missing one leg. Each item simultaneously reopened the wound and became precious to me. I stored everything in a shoebox under my bed despite Josh's concerns that my parents were deliberately torturing me. The box became a shrine of sorts, a tangible connection to my brother that I would sometimes open just to touch the items inside, as if they might somehow connect me to him. As weeks passed, I struggled to move forward. Josh suggested pursuing my GED, something impossible while trapped at home. The idea of completing my education sparked a tiny flame of hope amid the darkness. I found a local program online but encountered immediate obstacles when the administrator, Ms. Patel, required documentation I didn't possess. Her office smelled of coffee and paper, the fluorescent lights humming overhead as she explained the requirements, her bangles jingling softly as she gestured to the forms. My parents had kept all my records locked away, controlling even this aspect of my future. Feeling defeated but increasingly determined not to let them continue controlling my life, I created a fake email address, impersonating a guidance counselor from my former school, and requested my transcripts for a transfer student. My heart pounded as I typed the message, certain I would be caught in the lie. Surprisingly, it worked, and 3 days later, I had my academic records. The manila envelope felt impossibly important in my hands, the papers inside representing a future I might actually have. Josh seemed impressed, but worried when I showed him, warning that reaching out increased the risk of my parents finding me. His concerns sent chills through me, but I pushed aside my fears to focus on enrolling in the GED program. Ms. Patel accepted my documents, her dark eyes scanning them carefully before nodding her approval, and I started classes the following Monday, experiencing for the first time in years something resembling normal teenage life. The classroom was bright and clean, other students nodding hello as I found a seat. The normalcy of it all almost overwhelming. This fragile normalcy shattered 6 weeks after my arrival at Josh's when, returning from the grocery store at sunset, I spotted a familiar car parked across the street. My mother's car, with its distinctive dent above the right front tire and faded bumper sticker, the license plate partially obscured by tape. The plastic bags cut into my fingers as I froze, staring at the vehicle that represented everything I'd fled. Terror surged through me as I dropped my grocery bags and sprinted back to Josh's house, locking the door behind me before gasping out what I'd seen. Apples rolled across the floor. A carton of milk burst open on impact, spreading a white puddle that I barely noticed. Josh checked all entry points while suggesting I might be mistaken, attributing my sighting to stress and grief-induced paranoia. I wanted to believe him but knew what I'd seen. The distinctive rust pattern along the doorframe was unmistakable, burned into my memory from years of watching that car pull into our driveway, signaling whether to expect a good day or bad. That night, I woke to the sound of scratching at the front door, followed by the doorknob rattling. The noise cut through the darkness like a physical presence, instantly propelling me from sleep to terror. Frozen with fear, I texted Josh in the next room. Seconds later, the house alarm blared as Josh burst in wielding a baseball bat, instructing me to stay put while he investigated. The alarm's wail filled the apartment, so loud it seemed to vibrate through my bones. The police arrived to find no one, the officer dismissing the incident as likely neighborhood kids causing trouble. His flashlight beam swept across the porch as he shrugged, clearly eager to finish his report and move on. Josh installed new locks and security cameras the next day, but I couldn't shake the certainty that my parents had found me and were closing in. Every shadow seemed to hide their presence. Every unexpected sound made my heart race. Over the following weeks, Josh's behavior changed subtly. He spent more time on his phone having hushed conversations that abruptly ended when I entered the room, quickly closing his laptop when I approached. His excuses became flimsy, claiming work calls when I knew he wasn't scheduled, mentioning errands that never seemed to result in anything being brought home. When I finally confronted him, he admitted to being in contact with my parents, who had somehow tracked my RuneScape account to identify him, and offered money for information about my whereabouts. The kitchen light cast harsh shadows across his face as he explained, making his expression difficult to read. He claimed to be gathering intelligence on their plans to better protect me, but doubt crept in. The Josh who had rescued me wouldn't operate behind my back this way. His eyes didn't quite meet mine as he spoke, his fingers tapping nervously against the countertop. I locked my bedroom door that night, trust fracturing. The small click of the lock felt inadequate against the growing sense of betrayal. I pushed my dresser against the door for good measure, the wood scraping loudly against the floor. The next morning, Josh had vanished without explanation, his car gone and closet partially emptied. Hangers swung empty where his clothes had been, the bathroom counter missing his toothbrush and razor. My calls went straight to voicemail as I spent the day jumping at every sound, expecting my parents to appear at any moment. The apartment felt suddenly alien, no longer a sanctuary, but a trap waiting to spring. By evening, concern for Josh began to override my suspicions until I discovered a note slipped under the front door. The paper was thin and white, the edges slightly crumpled. The typed message read, "He's mine. You don't get to save one and leave the other to die," accompanied by a photo of me asleep in Josh's house, in my bed. The image showed me curled on my side, completely vulnerable, unaware of being watched. Someone had been inside while I slept. Dropping the paper in horror, I backed away as nausea swept through me. I couldn't remain there alone, knowing they had invaded this space. The walls seemed to close in, the air suddenly thick and unbreathable. I hastily packed clothes and Eli's mementos into my backpack, taking the $200 I'd saved from odd jobs Josh had helped me find. The bills felt insubstantial against what I might need, but it was all I had. I spent that night in a cheap motel with a chair wedged against the door, barely sleeping as every hallway noise startled me awake. The room smelled of cigarettes and cheap cleaner, the sheets rough against my skin. The ceiling fan clicked with each rotation, a metronome counting the seconds until morning. The next morning, I checked my email on the motel computer, finding a notice from my GED program, warning that I'd missed 2 classes and risked being dropped. The ancient monitor displayed the message in pixelated text, another door closing. I couldn't return there either. My parents had identified all my regular locations. Then I remembered Josh mentioning his friend Marcus, who owned a downtown restaurant called Flips and frequently needed help. The restaurant's red neon sign was visible from blocks away, a beacon of potential safety. When I approached Marcus, a large man with a shaved head and tattooed arms, his expression darkened at Josh's name. The kitchen behind him hissed and clanged with activity, the smell of frying onions and grilled meat filling the air. He hadn't seen Josh in days, noting his friend had missed their planned inventory session. Seeing my desperation, Marcus offered me a dishwashing job with cash payment and no questions, explaining that he owed Josh a favor. His massive hands dwarfed mine as we shook on the agreement, his grip firm but not threatening. The work was grueling but provided distraction from thoughts of Eli and my missing friend. Steam rose from the industrial dishwasher, making my shirt cling to my back as I loaded rack after rack of plates and glasses. My hands grew red and chapped from the hot water and chemicals, but the physical discomfort was almost welcome. Marcus allowed me to sleep in the small storage room above the restaurant, a cramped space barely fitting a cot and my backpack, but safer than Josh's compromised house. The room was hot during the day, cold at night, with the constant hum of the ventilation system and occasional shouts from the kitchen below. Still, it had a lock, and Marcus was the only other person with a key. For a brief period, I dared hope I'd escape detection until, a week into my new job, I spotted my father entering the diner across the street wearing its uniform shirt. His familiar gait and posture were unmistakable even from a distance, sending ice through my veins. I ducked behind the dumpster, heart racing at the realization they had followed me here too, systematically closing in. The metal bin reeked of rotting food, but I pressed myself against it anyway, making myself as small as possible until he disappeared inside. That night, sleep proved impossible as I pondered the note's message. Was my father attempting to recapture me solely for punishment? For revenge over Eli's death? The single bulb hanging from the ceiling cast strange shadows across the walls as I paced the small room, trying to make sense of their relentless pursuit. The next morning, I told Marcus I needed new accommodations without explaining why. My voice sounded steady despite the fear churning inside me. He mentioned a friend named Trish who rented rooms across town. I called immediately and arranged to view the place that afternoon, but Trish seemed uncomfortable during our meeting, making excuses about the room's unavailability. Her eyes darted nervously as she spoke, her fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. When pressed, she admitted someone had called that morning warning her against renting to me, claiming I had a history of property damage and legal troubles. My parents were methodically eliminating every escape route, every chance at stability, hunting me not to bring me home, but to make me suffer as they had made Eli suffer. That night, examining the items in my shoebox of Eli's possessions, I noticed something previously overlooked. A small note in Eli's handwriting on the back of a science notebook page reading, "If you find this, I'm probably gone. They won't stop until they break us both." The pencil marks were faint, as if he'd been afraid to press too hard and make the message too obvious. My blood chilled at this posthumous warning. Eli had known, had understood what our parents were capable of even better than I had. After a sleepless night, I realized I couldn't continue running. I needed to fight back for Eli's sake. I remembered his kind teacher, Mrs. Wagner, who had questioned our sudden withdrawal from school. She had always smiled at Eli in a way that made him stand taller, had once slipped him an extra granola bar when she thought no one was looking. After days searching online, I located her address an hour away by bus. The neighborhood was quiet quiet and tree-lined, the houses modest but well-maintained. When she opened her door, shock registered on her face before she quickly pulled me inside, checking the street before closing the door. Her living room was warm and cluttered with books, family photos on every surface. She explained that my parents had claimed we'd been sent to a special school, her eyes tearing up at the mention of Eli. I revealed everything: the systematic abuse, my escape, Eli's sewer slide, the harassment. The words poured out as we sat at her kitchen table, steam rising from the mugs of tea she'd prepared. She listened in horror, admitting she had suspected problems but lacked proof, my parents having convincing explanations for every concern raised. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed her graying hair behind her ears, regret evident in every line of her face. Mrs. Wagner retrieved a file containing copies of Eli's schoolwork, including a story titled The Locked Door that described our abuse through thinly veiled fiction, detailing our locked rooms, starvation, and psychological torment. The pages were slightly yellowed at the edges, preserved carefully in a folder with Eli's name written in her neat teacher's handwriting. She explained that Eli had submitted this 3 days before our parents withdrew us, after she had attempted to discuss the concerning content with him and scheduled a parent conference. I held the pages with trembling hands, realizing Eli had tried to reach out, had attempted to tell someone, but no one had truly listened. His careful printing filled the lined paper, the story of two brothers trapped with monsters who wore the faces of parents. With Mrs. Wagner's permission, I took the file, reading through everything on the bus ride back. The vehicle swayed and rumbled beneath me, but I barely noticed, absorbed in my brother's words. Eli's story devastated me with its simple portrayal of two brothers trapped with monsters, the older one escaping while the younger couldn't bear remaining behind. It wasn't fiction, but a desperate cry for help. The younger brother in the story whispered to the walls, hoping someone might hear him through them. He dreamed of flying away, but knew his wings were clipped. That night, I made multiple copies of Eli's story and began distributing them throughout the community, leaving them at the library, community center, and school board office, not including my name or direct accusations, simply allowing Eli's truth to finally be heard. The night air was cool against my face as I moved from building to building, slipping the papers into mail slots or leaving them on bulletin boards. I expected nothing, merely needing his voice to exist in the world, for someone to know what had happened to him, what our parents had done. Unexpectedly, people began talking. A librarian recognized our surname. A parent recalled the mysteriously homeschooled brothers who vanished, and whispers spread through the community. The story resonated in ways I hadn't anticipated, touching something in people that made them unable to stay silent. 3 days after distributing the copies, my mother appeared at Flips while I was washing dishes. Marcus called me to the front where she stood, her face contorted with cold fury. The restaurant had fallen unnaturally quiet, conversations halting as customers sensed the tension. Before I could react, she slapped me hard, loudly calling me an ungrateful liar. After everything we did for you. The sting spread across my cheek like fire, her wedding ring leaving a small cut near my eye. Marcus intervened, stepping between us as she declared I was her son and coming home with her. His massive frame created a barrier she couldn't breach. When I refused, she lunged again, but Marcus caught her arm and threatened to call police. She left after announcing to the shocked customers that I was sick in the head and shouldn't be believed. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile as she stormed out, the door slamming behind her. Marcus reluctantly fired me that evening, apologetic but unwilling to risk further drama at his business. His eyes were kind as he handed me my final pay in cash, adding an extra $50 to help. I understood, but found myself jobless, homeless, and exposed. The weight of uncertainty settled heavily on my shoulders as I packed my few belongings. The next morning, as I gathered my few possessions from the storage room, Marcus showed me his phone displaying a Facebook post in a local community group. The screen was bright in the dim room, showing a video that had already accumulated hundreds of comments. Someone had recorded my mother's outburst at the restaurant and posted it online, generating numerous comments connecting dots about the new residence on Pine Street, my father's job at Mel's Diner, and our mysterious homeschooling situation. People shared additional encounters with my parents' inappropriate behavior, and someone mentioned the distributed story about abuse, wondering if it described them. The truth was spreading faster than my parents could contain it, offering my first glimmer of hope since Eli's death. Marcus softened, offering another night's accommodation while I planned my next move. His hand rested briefly on my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that meant more than he could know. I stared at my phone, watching comments multiply, realizing the video was spreading rapidly, people talking and connecting incidents. This also meant my parents would grow increasingly desperate and dangerous. Their carefully constructed public image was crumbling, and cornered animals are always the most vicious. That night, every creak jolted me awake, expecting to find my father looming in the doorway. The old building settled and groaned, each sound magnified by my fear. Morning found me exhausted but determined to formulate a new plan and find safer accommodation. While scrolling through room listings, I received a text from an unknown number claiming to be Josh with a new phone, requesting to meet at Westfield Park at 2 p.m. by the pond bench. Hope surged that Josh was alive, quickly tempered by suspicion this might be another trap. The park was public enough to be relatively safe, safe, but had enough secluded areas to make me nervous. I decided to attend cautiously, arriving an hour early and positioning myself where I could observe the bench unseen. The park was busy with mothers pushing strollers and elderly people feeding ducks, normal scenes that felt alien to my hypervigilant state. At precisely 2 p.m., a black hooded figure sat down, immediately recognizable as Josh from his characteristic slouched posture and nervous leg bouncing. I approached vigilantly, scanning for my parents or observers. Josh's face registered relief as he stood to hug me, appearing thinner with dark circles underlining his eyes. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, his normally neat hair unwashed and too long. He explained that my parents had threatened to report him for kidnapping if he didn't reveal my location, so he had panicked and disappeared, thinking they would follow him instead of finding me. He'd been staying with various friends using disposable phones. His voice cracked as he described their threats, his hands shaking slightly as he pushed his glasses up his nose. Despite wanting to believe him, something felt wrong. When I questioned how he'd located me, he explained he'd called restaurants until finding Marcus. Josh then offered his cousin's remote cabin 2 hours north as a safe hiding place. The suggestion seemed suspiciously perfect, prompting me to request time for consideration. Josh provided a cheap flip phone with his number programmed before we parted, leaving me conflicted between trust and caution. The plastic phone felt light in my hand, a potential lifeline or another trap. Returning to flips, Marcus shared that my mother's video had gone viral. Someone had recognized my father at the diner, and he hadn't appeared for his shift. This information heightened my anxiety, wondering where my father might be if not at work. The knot in my stomach tightened as I considered the possibilities. An hour later, Marcus delivered a small brown courier package addressed to me without return information. The paper crinkled under my fingers as I carefully opened it, half expecting something harmful inside. Inside lay Eli's favorite toy soldier, the one he clutched when frightened, accompanied by a note in my father's handwriting. "This isn't over." The small plastic figure was exactly as I remembered, one arm raised in eternal salute, the green paint chipped from years of handling. My blood chilled at this evidence they were still watching, still finding me regardless of precautions. I considered Josh's cabin offer while rereading Eli's story, a particular line catching my attention. "The monsters always find you if you follow the path they expect." The words seemed to leap from the page, as if Eli was trying to guide me even now. This prompted me to question whether predictability enabled their persistent tracking. Rather than calling Josh immediately, I decided on an unexpected approach. The next morning, I visited the police station, not to report my parents, but to speak with Officer Daniels, who had responded to the break-in attempt at Josh's house and given me his contact information. The station smelled of coffee and floor cleaner, the fluorescent lights harsh overhead. After waiting 20 minutes, a tall man with salt and pepper hair approached, recognizing me from the previous incident. I shared a carefully edited version of my situation, explaining I was being followed and needed safety advice. Officer Daniels listened attentively, his concern visibly growing before he suggested a discreet youth shelter run by someone named Vicky, writing down the address and her name. His pen scratched against the notepad as he wrote, his handwriting neat and precise. The shelter occupied a converted church on the town's edge, where Vicky, a woman with gray dreadlocks and kind eyes, showed me to a small room containing a twin bed and desk with a door that locked, allowing my first uninterrupted night's sleep in weeks. The mattress was thin but clean, the sheets smelling faintly of lavender detergent. The building retained some of its church features: high ceilings, arched windows covered with simple curtains, wooden floors that creaked with every step. The following morning, I used the shelter's computer to check the local Facebook group. Finding my mother's video had generated hundreds of comments sharing additional incidents of my parents' public mistreatment of us. Small moments that individually seemed insufficient to report, but collectively painted a damning picture. A comment from Sarah Jennings caught my attention. "I was their neighbor for years, those poor boys. I called CPS twice, but nothing ever came of it." The screen blurred slightly as tears filled my eyes. Someone had tried to help us, but the system had failed. I messaged Sarah privately, surprised when she responded within minutes, expressing concern and arranging to meet at a coffee shop near the shelter. The cafe was busy enough to feel safe, the hum of conversations and espresso machines creating a buffer of white noise around us. Sarah appeared to be in her 60s with short gray hair and glasses, immediately embracing me with tears in her eyes. Her cardigan smelled of fabric softener and something floral as she hugged me tightly, as if trying to make up for years of missed comfort. She explained having lived next door for 5 years, witnessing the stark contrast between my mother's public charm and private cruelty. She had documented incidents, calling Child Protective Services twice, but my parents had successfully deceived the social workers, presenting a normal household with typical noisy children. After our homeschooling began, Sarah had called again but was told evidence was required for intervention. Her voice trembled with anger as she described the system's failures, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee mug. She produced a flash drive containing her meticulous records, including recordings of shouting audible through the walls, explaining she had maintained these in case someone eventually needed them. The small device seemed impossibly important as she pressed it into my palm. Sarah also revealed our family home had been empty for weeks since my departure, suggesting my parents had abandoned everything to pursue me, to punish me for leaving, for surviving, when Eli didn't. The thought sent a chill through me despite the warmth of the cafe. I thanked Sarah and returned to the shelter, the flash drive feeling impossibly heavy in my pocket. Concerned Josh might be in danger if my parents had been tracking me from the beginning, I called the number he'd provided, reaching voicemail where I left a warning message. The automated voice prompted me to speak after the tone, my words tumbling out urgently. That night, I listened to Sarah's recordings on the shelter's computer, her documentation proving remarkably thorough with dates, times, and brief descriptions of incidents. The computer's speakers were tinny but clear enough to hear the rage in my mother's voice, the sound of objects breaking, my father's cold commands. One file from when I was 14 captured my mother's voice, declaring no one would believe or care about worthless, stupid children, and that no one was coming to save us because no one knew we existed anymore. Tears streamed down my face as I listened to file after file documenting the verbal abuse, threats, breaking objects, Eli crying, my whispered attempts to comfort him. Sarah had captured everything, providing real, undeniable evidence of our suffering. Yet I hesitated to approach police, fearing they might dismiss me just as social workers had been charmed by my parents' performances. The next morning, Vicky knocked on my door announcing Josh had arrived. The sudden rap made me jump, my heart immediately racing. My heart raced at this revelation since I hadn't disclosed my location to him. In the common room, Josh jumped up at my appearance, expressing relief at finding me. His movement seemed too eager, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. When questioned about locating me, he claimed to have seen me entering the police station and followed me, but made no mention of my meeting with Sarah, which he should have witnessed if truly following me. I carefully asked if he'd received my message, and he nodded, claiming his phone had died yesterday. Another inconsistency since my call had gone directly to voicemail rather than ringing. Josh urged immediate departure to his cousin's cabin, claiming it wasn't safe at the shelter. When I mentioned needing to gather my belongings, he offered to accompany me, an offer I firmly declined. His insistence made my skin crawl, the hairs on my arms standing up in warning. In my room, I hastily packed while processing Josh's suspicious behavior and obvious lies. Had my parents somehow compromised him through threats or bribes? The flash drive from Sarah felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. I scribbled a note to Vicky warning against trusting Josh and requesting she contact Officer Daniels if I didn't return within 3 days, slipping it under her office door before rejoining Josh. The paper slid easily beneath the door, a small insurance policy I hoped I wouldn't need. We walked to his car, parked a block away, Josh constantly scanning the street in a manner suggesting he was searching for someone rather than watching for pursuers. His eyes darted to each passing vehicle, his posture tense. I casually inquired about his cousin's potential objections to our staying at the cabin, to which Josh replied his relative was in Europe for the summer, leaving the place empty. His answer came too quickly, too smoothly, as if rehearsed. We reached an unfamiliar older model car with tinted windows, and as I entered, I noticed a small toy soldier on the passenger floor identical to the one my father had sent me. The plastic figure lay partially hidden under the seat, but unmistakable in its chipped green paint and raised arm. Ice filled my veins at this unmistakable connection between Josh and my parents. They had somehow compromised him, or perhaps they had been collaborating all along. I needed to escape, but found myself trapped as we merged into traffic, Josh driving with one hand while the other rested too casually on the gear shift, effectively blocking the door. The car smelled of fast food and something chemical I couldn't identify. I feigned exhaustion, leaning against the window while watching Josh's reflection, noting his tense jaw and white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, revealing a completely different person from the one who had rescued me. The landscape changed from urban to suburban to rural, trees replacing buildings as we drove further from town. After 30 minutes of driving into increasingly rural areas, Josh stopped at a gas station to refuel. The station was small and dated, with only 2 pumps and a faded sign advertising cigarettes and lottery tickets. The moment he entered the store to prepay, I grabbed my backpack and slipped from the car, sprinting toward the wooded area behind the station. I pushed through branches and stumbled over roots until the gas station disappeared from view, then paused to catch my breath and assess my situation. Miles from town without transportation, phone, or clear direction. Leaves crunched beneath my feet as I moved deeper into the woods, the smell of pine and damp earth filling my nostrils. I walked parallel to the road, remaining within the tree line for concealment while maintaining sight of potential landmarks. The afternoon sun filtered through the branches, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. After approximately a mile, I spotted a small diner with a payphone visible near the restrooms. The building was weathered but well maintained, with a neon open sign glowing in the window. Gathering my courage, I entered and called the shelter, reaching Vicky and requesting help. The phone receiver was sticky against my ear, the cord tangled and stretched from years of use. 30 minutes later, Officer Daniels arrived in an unmarked police car. I'd been nursing a coffee, startling at every opening door, terrified of Josh's appearance. The bell above the door jingled with each new customer, sending a jolt of adrenaline through me each time. Daniels listened to my explanation about Josh's suspicious behavior and the toy soldier connection to my parents, nodding grimly before driving me to an anonymous motel on the town outskirts, paying for 3 nights and advising me to use a false name and avoid contacting anyone connected to my parents or Josh. The motel was basic but clean, the bedspread a faded floral pattern that had seen better days. After his departure, I sat on the bed overwhelmed by how quickly my tenuous security had unraveled, questioning whether Josh had genuinely been threatened or had betrayed me from the beginning. The walls of the room seemed to close in as I considered how few people I could truly trust. The next morning, I walked to a nearby library and created a new email address to contact Sarah, explaining recent events and requesting another meeting. The library was quiet and cool, the smell of books and furniture polish oddly comforting. She suggested a busy downtown cafe with multiple exits, arriving before me with a large envelope containing printouts of social media profiles, news articles, and public records about Joshua Mercer, age 29, with a history of fraud and identity theft targeting vulnerable individuals. The papers were neatly organized with sticky notes marking important sections, Sarah's handwriting small and precise on each tab. The pieces aligned with sickening clarity. Josh hadn't rescued me from kindness, but had identified an opportunity in a desperate, isolated teenager without support systems, easy to manipulate and control. His gaming clan leadership had been the perfect hunting ground, allowing him to identify vulnerable targets while building trust. When I questioned why he would collaborate with my parents, Sarah revealed they had posted online rewards offering $5,000 for information about my whereabouts, not from love or concern, but because I had escaped, defied their control. The printout showed my mother's carefully worded post in a private group, framing me as mentally unstable and potentially dangerous, needing to be brought home for treatment. She also discovered our family home faced foreclosure, explaining why they had withdrawn us from school, not for homeschooling, but because they could no longer maintain appearances as their financial situation deteriorated, completely isolating us as their frustrations intensified. The bank notices were dated months before our withdrawal from school, the timeline matching perfectly with the escalation of abuse. Sarah squeezed my hand when I asked what to do next, encouraging me to continue fighting, to stay alive as Eli would want. Her fingers were warm and steady against mine, grounding me when everything else felt uncertain. I spent the following days in the motel, venturing out only for necessities while Officer Daniels checked on me daily, bringing food and updates. The room became a strange limbo, neither home nor prison, just a temporary holding place while my future remained unclear. On the fourth day, he arrived with news they had located Josh attempting to claim my parents' reward money and brought him in for questioning regarding the break-in attempt at his house. Josh quickly confessed to planning my delivery to my parents for payment, revealing they had contacted him through my RuneScape account after my departure. This confirmation that Josh had never genuinely cared, had merely viewed me as a commodity to exploit, deepened my sense of betrayal. The one person I had trusted completely had been playing a role from the beginning. When I inquired about my parents, Daniels sighed, explaining that without direct evidence of abuse, and with my approaching 18th birthday, legal action remained complicated. His uniform creaked slightly as he shifted in the uncomfortable motel chair, clearly uncomfortable delivering this news. I produced Sarah's flash drive, and Daniels listened to several recordings, his expression darkening before he acknowledged their helpfulness, while cautioning that proving the voices belonged to my parents presented challenges, and statutes of limitations affected some incidents. Though he attempted gentleness, I recognized the legal system would likely fail us again, as it had throughout our lives. The system designed to protect children had too many loopholes, too many ways for abusers to slip through. Daniels suggested that while criminal charges might prove difficult, public opinion had already turned against my parents through the viral video, circulating rumors, and Eli's story, people discussing their behavior and expressing anger. He noted that sometimes the most effective punishment isn't imprisonment, but having nowhere to hide from one's actions. His words lingered with me long after he left, the idea that exposure itself might be a form of justice. I contemplated this perspective for days, considering justice, punishment, and what would truly impact my parents most significantly. The answer emerged while sorting through Eli's possessions, finding a journal page where he had expressed desire to become a writer someday, to tell stories that make people feel less alone. His handwriting was careful and deliberate, the page dog-eared as if he'd returned to it often. This revealed my path forward, simultaneously honoring Eli and holding our parents accountable. I contacted Sarah, who connected me with local journalist Mira Chen, known for covering systemic failures affecting vulnerable children. We met in her cluttered office where newspaper clippings covered the walls, and I presented everything: Sarah's recordings, Eli's writings, my detailed account of our experiences, even showing the shoebox of items my parents had sent to torment me. Coffee cups and notepads littered her desk, evidence of stories in progress. Mira listened attentively, occasionally seeking clarification without interrupting. When I finished, she acknowledged the story's power while ensuring I understood the permanence of public disclosure. I thought of Eli's attempted outreach through his story, how no one had truly listened, and confirmed my decision to proceed. Mira outlined a careful, legal approach that wouldn't directly name my parents, but would allow readers to connect obvious dots, focusing on systemic failures, neighbors whose reports weren't taken seriously, teachers with unaddressed concerns, and social workers deceived by my parents' performances. Her fingers flew across her keyboard as she took notes, occasionally pausing to ask follow-up questions that showed her thorough approach to reporting. The article appeared a week later as a front-page feature titled, "Invisible Children: How a System Failed Two Brothers," using only our first names without photographs but providing sufficient context for anyone following recent events to identify the subjects. The newspaper felt heavy in my hands as I read the story. Seeing our experiences laid out in black and white for everyone to see, the response proved immediate and overwhelming, with thousands of online shares, local television coverage, and others coming forward with similar experiences of children failed by protective systems and parents who manipulated investigations. Then came a note left on my motel room door, handwritten on torn paper. "You think this is justice? You think you're better than us? You left him. You." My father had signed with his full name, an unprecedented mistake for someone who had meticulously hidden his identity and actions for years. The paper trembled in my hands, his handwriting as familiar as my own. I brought this evidence to Officer Daniels, who recognized its potential as both a threat and proof they knew my location, helping me file for a restraining order to officially document their harassment. The courthouse was imposing with its marble floors and high ceilings, but the process itself was surprisingly straightforward. The clerk efficient and non-judgmental as she processed my paperwork. I took an additional step likely to hurt them more than any legal action by posting online using my real name for the first time. My father left this note on my door: "My brother is dead. I will not be silent," including a photograph clearly showing his signature. Within hours, the post circulated through local groups, someone recognizing his handwriting from a complaint letter, another parent sharing how he had berated her child at a playground for crying like a girl. The community completely rejected them, resulting in job terminations after customer complaints about an abuser working at the diner, their landlord requesting their departure following neighbor safety concerns, and their inability to secure new employment or housing. Though they faced no arrest or charges, their carefully constructed facade had crumbled, exposing the monsters beneath. A month after the article's publication, Officer Daniels called to inform me my parents had left town the previous day, packing their meager remaining possessions and driving away without forwarding address, fleeing not from legal consequences, but from facing what they had done, from being seen for what they truly were. The news brought a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. They were gone, but so was any possibility of them ever truly facing justice for what happened to Eli. That evening, I visited Eli's grave for the first time, Sarah having told me its location in a small cemetery on the town's edge. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rows of headstones as I made my way through the quiet grounds. His headstone appeared starkly simple, displaying only his name and dates without personal message or "beloved son" inscription, our parents not caring enough to provide even that final acknowledgement. I sat on the grass beside the grave, my fingers tracing the letters of his name carved into the stone. I remained beside his grave until sunset, sharing everything: my escape, the exposed truth, our parents finally facing consequences for their actions. I apologized for leaving him, for failing to protect him, promising his story now helped others, that he continued making a difference even after death. Birds called to each other in the trees surrounding the cemetery, the air growing cooler as the sun descended. As I prepared to leave, I noticed something propped against a nearby tree, a small package wrapped in brown paper. Approaching cautiously, fearing another parental taunt, I instead discovered a brand new journal with an attached note, foretelling the stories that need to be told, from those who wish they'd listened sooner, signed by several teachers from our former school, including Mrs. Wagner. The journal's cover was soft leather, the pages crisp and blank, waiting to be filled. For the first time in months, something resembling peace settled within me. Not happiness, which would require much longer to rediscover, but a sense that perhaps I could construct something meaningful from the ruins of our lives, something honoring Eli's memory while helping other invisible children find their voices. I tucked the journal into my backpack and walked away from the cemetery into an uncertain but open future.